A single mom and her dog followed a 30-year-old photo to a waterfall and uncovered a buried secret. At first, it seemed like just an old picture tucked inside her mother's Bible. But when she stood at the roaring white waterfall from that photo, everything changed. Her dog began to dig, and what he uncovered shattered everything she thought she knew about her family. Inside a rusted box were hidden letters. Letters her mother had written to a man who vanished without a trace 3 decades ago. A man the town swore was gone forever. But why did her daughter whisper that the man in the photo looked just like her grandfather? And what dangerous truth did her mother hide for all these years? The past is no longer buried. It's waiting at the waterfall. What secret could destroy, or finally heal, a family torn apart by silence? Let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. If you like stories that connect us, don't forget to subscribe before you leave a raindrum steadily against the attic windows. As Nika Monroe sifted through cardboard boxes filled with her mother's belongings, the musty scent of old papers and forgotten memories filled the dim space. She pulled her sweater closer, fighting off the morning chill that seemed to seep through the rafters of her childhood home. I should have done this months ago, she whispered to herself, lifting another weathered box onto her lap. Her mother had passed away 6 months earlier, but Nika had kept putting off the difficult task of sorting through her possessions. Each item held a story, a fragment of the complicated relationship they'd shared. Her fingers brushed against something leather-bound at the bottom of the box. Pulling it free, she recognized her mother's Bible immediately. Its corners worn smooth from years of daily reading, its pages rippled from moisture and use. Gold letters on the spine had faded to nearly nothing. As Nika opened the Bible, something slipped from between its pages and fluttered to the wooden floorboards. She reached down and picked up a Polaroid photograph, its colors slightly faded but still clear. The date 1995 was written in her mother's neat handwriting across the bottom. Her breath caught in her throat. The photograph showed a magnificent waterfall, its white waters cascading down dark rocks into a misty pool below. But it was the 2 figures standing near the cliff's edge that made her hands tremble. One of them, a young woman with long dark hair wearing a red jacket, looked exactly like her mother had in her 20s. The other figure was harder to make out, partially hidden by shadows. "Mom," Nika whispered. "What weren't you telling me?" Later that morning, Nika sat across from her daughter at the kitchen table, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. The rain continued outside, creating a cozy atmosphere that contrasted with her unsettled thoughts. "Mom, you're being weird," her 10-year-old daughter said, taking a big bite of toast. "What's wrong?" Nika pulled the Polaroid from her pocket and placed it on the table. "I found this in Grandma's Bible this morning." Her daughter grabbed the photo, milk dribbling down her chin as she examined it. "Cool waterfall. Is that Grandma?" "I think so, but I don't remember her ever mentioning this place, or who that other person might be." Her daughter's eyes lit up with the pure enthusiasm only a child could muster. "We should go find it," she exclaimed, bouncing in her seat. Like treasure hunters, Nika couldn't help but laugh, the sound easing some of the tension in her shoulders. "Honey, we don't even know where this is. It could be anywhere, so we can look it up on the internet." "Please, Mom." Her daughter's eyes pleaded with the irresistible hope of youth. "Finish your breakfast, sweetie. We've got errands to run today." But as Nika folded laundry that afternoon, her daughter's suggestion kept nagging at her. The photograph seemed to burn in her pocket, full of unanswered questions. Why had her mother kept it hidden in her Bible? Who was the other person? And why had she never mentioned this place? Setting down a half-folded towel, Nika pulled out her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing "Waterfalls near Springfield." Several results popped up, and she began scrolling through images. Nothing matched. She refined her search, adding details about the rock formation she'd noticed in the photo. After 20 minutes of searching, her heart nearly stopped. There it was, Whispering Falls, just 45 minutes from their home. The same distinctive rock face, the same curve of the water as it fell. Even the viewing platform looked identical to the spot where her mother had stood in the photograph. The discovery left her restless. As night fell, Nika found herself unable to sleep, sitting in the window seat of her bedroom. Scout, her faithful golden retriever, lay at her feet, his warm presence providing comfort as she studied the Polaroid for the 100th time that day. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a clear night sky filled with stars. Scout's tail thumped gently against the floor as Nika scratched behind his ears. "What do you think, boy?" she whispered. "Should we go see what Mom was hiding?" The dog lifted his head, brown eyes full of understanding, and Nika felt a sense of peace settle over her. The decision crystallized in her mind, clear and certain. Tomorrow, she and Scout would drive to Whispering Falls. Whatever secrets lay hidden in that photograph, she needed to understand them for her mother's memory. And for herself, she tucked the Polaroid carefully into her wallet. already planning their early morning departure. Some mysteries needed to be solved, even if the answers might change everything. She thought she knew about her mother. The Sunday morning. Sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Nika loaded the last items into her aging blue SUV. Scout's tail wagged enthusiastically as he watched her pack a wicker basket filled with sandwiches, fruit, and bottles of water. A well-worn plaid blanket was folded neatly on top. It's just a little adventure, Nika muttered to herself, trying to calm the flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach. She checked her pocket for the 100th time, making sure the Polaroid was still there. Her daughter bounded out of the house, wearing her favorite purple hiking boots and carrying her backpack stuffed with what Nika suspected were far too many snacks. "Are we really going to find Grandma's waterfall?" she asked, practically vibrating with excitement. "We're going to try, sweetie," Nika replied, helping her daughter climb into the backseat. Scout jumped in after her, settling down with his head on her lap. "But remember, it might not look the same anymore. It's been almost 30 years since that picture was taken." The SUV's engine rumbled to life, and they pulled out of the driveway just as their neighborhood was beginning to stir. Sunday morning joggers waved as they passed, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the local bakery. As they left the city limits, the landscape gradually transformed. Suburban houses gave way to rolling farmland where morning mist still clung to the fields. Her daughter pressed her face against the window, counting cows and horses in the pastures they passed. "Mom, can we listen to music?" she asked, and soon they were all singing along to her daughter's favorite playlist, even Scout joining in with the occasional howl that made them both laugh. After about 30 minutes of driving, they entered a small town that seemed frozen in time. The main street was lined with brick buildings sporting faded advertisements painted on their sides. A single traffic light swayed gently in the morning breeze. "This place looks sleepy," her daughter observed as they passed a closed diner with chrome trim and red vinyl seats visible through the windows. "It's early on a Sunday, honey. Most places aren't open yet." Following the GPS directions, they turned onto a narrow road that wound its way into dense forest. The pavement eventually gave way to gravel, and Nika slowed down, careful of the rocks pinging against the SUV's undercarriage. Finally, they reached a small parking area marked with a weathered wooden sign, reading Whispering Falls Trail. Only two other cars were parked there, their windows covered in morning dew. "This is it," Nika announced, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. They climbed out of the SUV, and Scout immediately began sniffing the ground with intense interest. Her daughter helped spread out their supplies between the backpacks, while Nika consulted the trail map posted near the trailhead. "It says it's 1.5 miles to the falls," she reported. "Think you can handle that?" "Of course," her daughter replied, adjusting her backpack straps with determination. The trail started narrow and rocky, bordered by thick ferns and moss-covered logs. Scout took the lead, his golden fur glowing in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. His nose worked overtime, taking in the rich scents of pine needles and wet earth from yesterday's rain. "Look, Mom," her daughter called out, pointing to a cluster of bright orange mushrooms growing on a fallen tree. "They look like tiny umbrellas." As they hiked deeper into the forest, the air grew cooler and damper. The sound of running water gradually became noticeable, starting as a distant whisper and growing steadily louder with each step. Scout's excitement seemed to build along with the sound. He kept running ahead on the trail, then turning back to make sure they were following, his tail wagging the whole time. "Scout, slow down," Nika called out, but couldn't help smiling at his enthusiasm. The trail began to slope upward, and the sound of rushing water grew even stronger. The air felt different now, carrying a fine mist that made their skin tingle. Her daughter grabbed her hand. "Mom, I think I can see it through the trees." The trail curved sharply to the right, and suddenly the trees opened up to reveal their destination. Nika stopped dead in her tracks, her free hand instinctively reaching for the Polaroid in her pocket. There it was, Whispering Falls, looking exactly as it had in the photograph taken nearly 3 decades ago. The white water cascaded down the dark rock face in a constant roar, creating a cloud of mist that rose into the air like smoke. Sunlight caught in the spray, forming tiny rainbows that danced and shifted with the wind. With trembling fingers, Nika pulled out the Polaroid. She held it up, aligning it with the scene before her. The match was perfect, every curve of the rock face, every angle of the falls, even the small viewing platform jutting out from the cliffside. It was as if time had stood still in this one magical spot, preserving the scene exactly as her mother had found it all those years ago. Nika settled onto a sun-warmed rock near the waterfall's edge, the spray creating a fine mist in her hair. She held the Polaroid carefully, studying every detail. The two figures in the photo were small, but one was unmistakably her mother. She'd know that stance anywhere. But who was the other person? At the edge of the clearing, Scout's excited barking drew her attention. Her golden retriever was pawing enthusiastically at the ground near a massive oak tree's roots, his tail wagging with determination. Her daughter ran over to him, her laughter echoing across the clearing. "Mom, come look what Scout found," her daughter called out, but her voice suddenly changed from excitement to curiosity. "Wait, there's something here." Nika tucked the photo into her pocket and made her way over. Scout was tugging at something metallic protruding from between two large roots. As she got closer, she could see it was the corner of an old box, its surface dulled and rusted by years of exposure. "Should we help him get it out?" her daughter asked, already kneeling beside Scout, careful of sharp edges, Nika warned. Joining them, together, they worked to free the box from its earthen prison. It was about the size of a showbox, made of metal that had once been painted green but was now mostly rust-colored. The lid was sealed shut with corrosion, but otherwise the box seemed intact. "What do you think is inside?" her daughter whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Nika examined the box carefully. Only one way to find out. She took out her car keys and used them to carefully pry at the lid's edge. It resisted at first, but then with a grinding sound, the lid finally gave way inside. Protected from the elements was a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The paper had yellowed with age, but the writing was still clearly visible. Nika's hands trembled as she lifted the bundle out. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was her mother's. The top envelope was addressed to Thomas Hale in her mother's distinctive cursive. Nika's heart began to race. She'd never heard that name before. Yet here were what looked like dozens of letters, all in her mother's hand, all addressed to this mysterious man. With trembling fingers, she untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. Her daughter pressed close against her side as she began to read. "Dearest Thomas, I know we agreed to be careful, but I had to write. Every day without you feels endless. I keep thinking about our plans, about finding a way to be together properly. I know it's dangerous. What you've discovered about the mill could change everything. But we have to be smart about this. Meet me at our spot next Friday. I'll wait until sunset. All my love." Sarah. Nika's mouth went dry. She pulled out another letter, then another. Each one spoke of deep love and desperate secrecy. There were mentions of evidence and doing what's right, mixed with passionate declarations and careful plans for clandestine meetings. Scout whined softly and pressed against her legs, as if sensing her distress. Her daughter touched her arm gently. "Mom, are you okay?" The sun was beginning to set behind the ridge, painting the waterfall in shades of orange and gold. Nika felt dizzy with the weight of what she'd discovered. The mother she thought she'd known, the quiet bookkeeper who'd raised her alone, who'd never spoken of romance or adventure, had lived a whole other life. These letters spoke of danger, of moral choices, of a love so strong it had to be hidden. She looked at her daughter's concerned face, then at Scout, who was still nosing around the spot where he'd found the box, as if searching for more treasures. The mist from the waterfall had dampened the letters slightly, and Nika carefully returned them to their box. With shaking hands, she folded the rusted lid shut. The metal felt cool against her palms, heavy with secrets. "We need to know more," she whispered to her daughter, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. The last rays of sunlight caught the spray from the waterfall, creating a brief rainbow that arched over their heads. Scout padded back to them, sitting protectively at their feet as if he understood the gravity of their discovery. The box of letters sat between them, a tangible link to a past Nika had never known existed, filled with questions that demanded answers. The kitchen was quiet except for the gentle hum of the dishwasher and Scout's occasional snuffling. As Nika spread the weathered letters across her oak table, the overhead light cast a warm glow on the yellowed papers, each one carefully arranged in chronological order. Outside, crickets had begun their evening chorus, and through the doorway, she could hear the soft scratching of her daughter's colored pencils as she drew in the living room. Scout lay stretched out beneath the table, his golden fur brushing against her feet, as he occasionally lifted his head to sniff at the papers above him. The familiar scent of her mother's perfume still clung faintly to some of the letters, bringing back memories of warm hugs and bedtime stories. With trembling fingers, Nika picked up the first letter, dated March 15th, 1995. Her mother's elegant handwriting flowed across the page, telling of secret meetings and shared dreams. As she read letter after letter, a story began to emerge, one of forbidden love and mounting danger. "My dearest Thomas," one letter read, "I've made all the arrangements. Next Friday, after the mill closes, we'll meet at our spot. I've saved enough money, and with the evidence you've gathered, we can start fresh somewhere new. Somewhere safe." Nika's heart raced as she read more. Her mother had planned everything: bus tickets, a small apartment in another state, even new identities. But something had gone wrong. The final letter, dated June 23, 1995, was tear-stained and hurried. Thomas, where are you? I waited all night. Please, if you get this, let me know you're safe. Her hands shaking, Nika reached for her laptop. The keys clicked softly as she typed Thomas Hale 1995 into the search engine. Scout lifted his head, ears perking up at the sound. The first few results were unrelated, but then she saw it, a scanned newspaper article from the local paper, dated June 25, 1995. The headline made her breath catch. Local man Thomas Hale vanishes without trace. The article described how Thomas, a respected worker at the lumber mill, had disappeared without warning. His car was found abandoned at the mill parking lot, his apartment untouched. The police have found no signs of foul play, but also no clues to his whereabouts. Nika scrolled through more articles, finding nothing but dead ends. It was as if Thomas Hale had simply ceased to exist that summer night in 1995. The same night her mother had waited for him at their meeting spot. Scout suddenly raised his head, tail wagging as soft footsteps approached. Nika looked up to see her daughter standing in the doorway, the old Polaroid photo held carefully in her small hands. The girl's face wore an expression of confused wonder. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the humming dishwasher. She held out the photograph, pointing to the male figure standing beside Nika's mother. "That man looks just like Grandpa did in old pictures, but younger." Nika felt her breath catch in her throat as she took the photo from her daughter's hands. How had she not seen it before? The man's stance, the way he held himself, the curve of his smile, it was eerily similar to the few photos she had of her grandfather. As a young man, Scout padded over to the girl, nuzzling her hand as if sensing her confusion. The kitchen suddenly felt too small to warm as Nika's mind raced with questions. Who was Thomas Hale really? What was his connection to her family? And why had her mother never spoken of him? The mystery that had begun with a simple photograph had grown deeper, more complex, reaching back through decades of silence and secrets. Nika looked at her daughter's curious face, then back at the scattered letters on the table, each one a piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. The crickets outside grew louder as evening deepened into night, and Scout settled back down with a contented sigh, keeping watch over his family as they sat together in the kitchen, surrounded by the echoes of a long-buried past. Morning sunlight filtered through autumn leaves as Nika's car pulled up to Riverside Elementary School. Her daughter gathered her backpack, the worn straps decorated with colorful pins and badges. "Have a great day, sweetheart," Nika said, watching as her daughter hopped out. "I'll pick you up at 3 o'clock. Bye, Mom." "Bye, Scout." The girl waved, her ponytail bouncing as she ran toward her friends waiting by the school entrance. Scout wagged his tail from the back seat, nose pressed against the window as he watched her go. Once she disappeared inside, Nika steered the car toward downtown, where the old brick library stood like a sentinel from another era. "You'll have to wait in the car, buddy," she told Scout, scratching behind his ears. He gave her a disappointed look but settled onto the back seat, already looking sleepy in the warm morning sun. Inside the library, the familiar scent of old books and wood polish wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. The building had been there since the 1920s, its dark wooden shelves reaching toward high ceilings decorated with intricate crown molding. Nika had spent countless hours here as a child, losing herself in stories and adventures today. Though she wasn't here for fiction. She made her way to the reference desk, where a silver-haired librarian peered at her over wire-rimmed glasses. "The local archives," the woman repeated when Nika asked. "Down those stairs, dear. Everything from 1990 and newer is in the blue filing cabinets." The basement archive room was cool and quiet, lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. Nika pulled open drawer after drawer, scanning through folders labeled by date. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached 1995. The first article she found mentioned the mill strike. "Workers demand safety reforms," the headline declared. According to the story, dozens of employees had walked out, protesting dangerous working conditions and suspicious accidents. Thomas Hale's name appeared halfway through the article, quoted as saying, "Someone needs to speak up before more people get hurt." More articles followed, painting a picture of rising tensions. The mill owners had brought in replacement workers, leading to confrontations at the gates. Then, suddenly, the strike ended. The final article mentioned undisclosed agreements and mutual understanding reached. 2 weeks later, Thomas Hale disappeared. Nika's heart pounded as she read between the lines. The timing couldn't be coincidental. She found another article, this one barely a paragraph long. Tucked away on page 6, questions remain about mill safety. It mentioned unconfirmed reports of tampered equipment and covered-up incidents. The sound of shuffling feet made her look up. The elderly librarian from upstairs stood in the doorway, watching her with knowing eyes. "Finding what you're looking for?" she asked, moving closer. Her name tag read Helen. "I'm researching the mill strike," Nika explained. "And Thomas Hale." Helen's expression shifted, becoming both cautious and interested. She said softly. "That's a name I haven't heard in quite a while." She glanced around as if checking they were alone. "You might want to talk to Margaret Watson." She was the town historian back then, kept records of everything. Retired now, but sharp as ever. "Do you know where I could find her?" Helen wrote down an address on a slip of paper. "She lives in the yellow house on Cedar Street. Tends her roses most mornings." She hesitated, then added, "Be careful with these old stories, dear. Some people prefer them staying buried." Nika gathered the articles she'd found, making copies of the ancient photocopier in the corner. Each new piece of information seemed to raise more questions. What had Thomas really discovered at the mill? How many others had known? And most importantly, what had happened to him that June night? The afternoon sun felt startlingly bright as she stepped outside. The manila folder of copied articles clutched against her chest. Scout's happy bark greeted her from the car, where he'd been patiently waiting. His golden fur glowed in the sunlight streaming through the windows. As she slid into the driver's seat, Nika looked at the address Helen had given her. Margaret Watson, someone who might finally have answers about what happened in 1995. Someone who might know the truth about Thomas Hale and her mother's connection to him. Scout nudged her elbow with his wet nose, as if sensing her mix of excitement and apprehension. She reached back to pat his head, drawing comfort from his steady presence. The folder of articles sat heavy on the passenger seat beside her, each page filled with pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. The yellow cottage on Maple Street looked like something from a storybook, with its white trim and overflowing flower boxes. Nika stood at the white picket gate, taking in the carefully tended garden where late summer blooms nodded in the afternoon breeze. The house itself seemed to hold secrets, its windows like knowing eyes gazing out at the quiet street, gathering her courage. Nika pushed open the gate and walked up the stone path. Wind chimes tinkled softly from the porch, their gentle music matching the peaceful atmosphere. Before she could even knock, the door opened, revealing a small woman with silver hair and bright, alert eyes. "I wondered when someone would come asking," Margaret Spencer said, studying Nika's face with interest. "You look just like her, you know, your mother." Nika's heart skipped a beat. "You knew my mother?" "Oh yes, dear. Everyone knew Caroline Monroe." Margaret stepped back, gesturing welcomingly. Come in, come in. I expect you have questions." The interior of the cottage was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of fresh-baked cookies and furniture polish. But what caught Nika's attention were the photographs, hundreds of them, covering nearly every wall. Black and white images of the town's past, carefully framed and arranged in chronological order, told the story of their community across decades. "I've documented everything," Margaret explained, leading Nika into a cozy sitting room. "The good, the bad, and everything in between. That's what historians do. We keep the truth alive, even when others might prefer to forget." Nika settled into a floral armchair while Margaret bustled about, bringing a tea tray with china cups and a plate of cookies. The older woman moved with surprising energy for her age, her movements precise and purposeful. "Now then," Margaret said, pouring tea into delicate cups. "Tell me what brought you here." Nika pulled out the Polaroid and the newspaper articles, laying them carefully on the coffee table. "I found these in my mother's things. And then at the waterfall we found letters." She hesitated, watching Margaret's face. The older woman picked up the Polaroid, her expression softening. "Ah yes, Thomas and Caroline. Such a sad story. Did you know them? Thomas Hale and my mother." Margaret nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "Oh yes, I knew them both well. Your mother was such a vibrant young woman, full of dreams and determination. And Thomas," she smiled sadly, "Thomas was one of the good ones. Principled, kind, always standing up for what was right." Nika leaned forward, her tea forgotten. "What happened between them?" "It was a different time, dear. The mill dominated everything. Jobs, politics, social life. When things started going wrong there, Thomas couldn't stay quiet. He saw the corners being cut, the safety violations, the money being skimmed from worker benefits." Margaret's voice grew quieter. "He gathered evidence, kept records, planned to take it all to the state authorities. And my mother, they fell in love during the strike. It wasn't supposed to happen. Caroline was engaged to another man, someone the mill owners approved of. But she and Thomas, they connected on a deeper level. Both of them wanted justice, wanted things to change." Margaret sighed. "They tried to keep it secret, but in a small town, whispers spread." Nika's hands trembled as she picked up her teacup. The articles mentioned threats? Margaret's expression darkened. Yes, anonymous notes, late-night phone calls. The millmen didn't take kindly to whistleblowers. Thomas knew he was in danger, but he wouldn't back down. He believed exposing the truth was worth the risk. And then he disappeared, just vanished. One night in June, right when he was about to go public with what he knew. Margaret stood up suddenly, walking to one of the photo-covered walls. She pointed to a group picture, mill workers standing proudly outside the factory gates. That's Thomas, there in the back, always standing tall, even when others tried to make him shrink. Nika joined her, studying the young man's face. He had kind eyes and a determined set to his jaw. Did anyone ever find out what happened to him? Officially, no. But people talked. Some said he ran away, others that he was paid off to keep quiet. But those who knew him, Margaret's voice trailed off. Those who knew him knew he wouldn't have left without a reason. Especially not with your mother waiting for him. Moving back to her chair, Margaret picked up a cookie, but didn't eat it. You need to be careful, dear. The mill's gone now, but some of those men are still around. Their children run things in town. They won't like someone digging up old secrets, but I need to know the truth. Nika insisted. About Thomas, about my mother. I understand. Margaret's eyes were kind but serious. Just watch your step. Ask too many questions in the wrong places, and you might stir up more than memories. They talked until the afternoon light began to fade. Margaret sharing stories about the town's history, carefully weaving in details about Thomas and Caroline's secret romance. She described how they would meet at the library, passing notes between books, or take walks by the river where fewer eyes would see them dot as dust settled over the town. Nika gathered her things to leave. The air had grown cooler, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Margaret walked her to the door, then paused on the porch steps. If you want the truth, child, follow the waterfall, she called after Nika. He left more behind than people realize. Standing at her gate, Nika turned back to look at the old historian. Margaret stood like a guardian of memories on her porch, silhouetted against the warm light from inside. The wind chimes sang their gentle song, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at the approaching night. The words echoed in Nika's mind as she walked to her car. Follow the waterfall, the place where this mystery had begun, where Scout had found the tin box of letters. What else might be hidden there, waiting to be discovered? The question tugged at her thoughts as she drove home through the quiet streets, past houses where people were settling in for the evening, unaware of the secrets stirring in their midst. Each streetlight she passed cast momentary shadows through her windshield, like pieces of the past reaching out to touch her. Margaret's warnings about being careful mixed with her encouragement to seek the truth, creating a complex web of caution and curiosity in Nika's mind. The town itself seemed different now, charged with hidden meaning, every corner potentially holding another clue to the mystery of Thomas Hale and her mother's secret past. The fluorescent lights of Morton's grocery store buzzed overhead as Nika pushed her cart down the produce aisle. Scout padded faithfully beside her, his service vest neat and clean against his golden fur. She was grateful the store allowed service animals. Scout's presence helped keep her grounded. When her thoughts started spinning with questions about Thomas Hale and her mother's secrets. Let's see, she murmured, consulting her shopping list. We need carrots, celery. Her voice trailed off as she noticed Scout's tail beginning to wag. The dog's attention had fixed on something, or someone, approaching from the other end of the aisle. Beautiful dog you've got there. A man's voice said warmly. Golden retriever? Nika looked up to see a tall man about her age, maybe in his late 30s, with kind eyes and sandy brown hair touched with gray at the temples. He wore a casual button-down shirt and carried a small shopping basket. Double quotes, yes, this is Scout, she replied, noting how her usually reserved dog seemed drawn to the stranger. Scout's tail wagged faster as the man knelt down to his level. May I? The man asked, gesturing to pet Scout. At Nika's nod, he reached out to scratch behind Scout's ears. I had a golden growing up. They're such special dogs, they really are, Nika agreed, watching how naturally Scout took to him. I'm Nika Monroe. The man stood, offering his hand. David Hale, he said. Nice to meet you. Nika froze, her hand halfway extended. Hale, she repeated, her heart suddenly racing. Are you related to Thomas Hale? Now it was David's turn to look startled. His friendly expression shifted to something more guarded. He was my uncle, he said carefully, though I haven't heard anyone mention his name in years. How do you know about Thomas? Nika glanced around the store, suddenly aware they were having this conversation between the lettuce and the tomatoes. Would you maybe want to grab a coffee? There's a cafe just next door. David studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I think that might be a good idea. 20 minutes later, They sat at a corner table in the Sweet Bean Cafe, to steaming mugs between them. Scout lay contentedly at their feet, occasionally glancing up at David with interested eyes. "So," David said, stirring his coffee, "how do you know about my uncle?" Nika took a deep breath. "My mother's name was Caroline Bennett," she said, watching his reaction carefully. Recognition flickered in David's eyes. "Caroline," he repeated softly. "I remember hearing that name when I was young." In whispers, usually, when the adults thought I couldn't hear. "I found some letters," Nika continued, "at the waterfall. They were from my mother to your uncle." David leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. "You found letters? Recently?" She nodded. Scout actually dug up a tin box containing them. They were love letters, talking about plans to meet, to run away together. "The waterfall," David mused. "I used to go there sometimes as a teenager, trying to, I don't know, feel closer to him somehow, to understand what happened." He ran a hand through his hair. "I was only 10 when he disappeared. Old enough to know something terrible had happened, but too young to understand what or why." "What do you remember about that time?" Nika asked gently. David's eyes grew distant. "I remember the tension. How my father, Thomas's brother, would pace at night, making phone calls, searching. The police investigation that went nowhere. The rumors that spread through town." He paused. "And I remember the way some people wouldn't look us in the eye anymore. Like they knew something, but couldn't, or wouldn't, say what." Nika pulled out her phone and showed him the Polaroid from her mother's Bible. David's hands trembled slightly as he took it. "That's him," he whispered. "With your mother? They look happy." "They were in love," Nika said. "According to Margaret, the town historian, they were planning to expose corruption at the mill." David nodded grimly. "That fits with what I've pieced together over the years. Uncle Thomas was always principled, always fighting for what was right. My father used to say he had more courage than sense sometimes." They spent the next hour sharing what they knew, Nika telling him about the letters and her conversation with Margaret, David sharing memories of his uncle and bits of family history he gathered over the years. "The official story was that he just left town," David said. "But nobody in our family ever believed that. Thomas wouldn't have abandoned us without a word. And if what you're saying about your mother is true, he wouldn't have abandoned her either." The cafe had grown quieter as the afternoon wore on. Through the windows, they could see the sun beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "We should exchange numbers," David suggested, pulling out his phone. "If we're both looking for answers about what happened, maybe we can help each other." Nika agreed, and they swapped contact information. As they stood to leave, Scout got to his feet and gave a soft, almost thoughtful bark. "I think he likes you," Nika smiled. "The feeling's mutual," David replied, giving Scout one final pat. "I'll be in touch soon. And Nika, thank you for sharing this with me. For the first time in years, I feel like we might actually find out what happened to Uncle Thomas." They parted ways outside the cafe, each heading to their respective cars. Scout watched David go, letting out another gentle bark that seemed to echo with significance in the gathering dusk. Nika couldn't shake the feeling that this chance meeting would prove to be a turning point in their search for the truth. The morning dawned crisp and clear as Nika packed a small backpack with water bottles, sandwiches, and trail mix. Her daughter bounced excitedly by the door, already wearing her favorite hiking boots, while Scout wagged his tail in anticipation of another adventure. "Remember your jacket," Nika called out, watching her daughter dash back to grab it from the coat rack. The morning air still held a hint of autumn chill. Despite the sunshine streaming through the windows, a car horn sounded outside. David had arrived right on time. He stepped out of his blue pickup truck, wearing sturdy hiking clothes and carrying his own backpack. "Good morning," he called out, walking up the driveway. "Perfect day for exploring." Scout bounded over to greet him, tail wagging furiously. In the few days since their chance meeting at the grocery store, the golden retriever had taken quite a liking to David, and the feeling seemed mutual. "Thanks for coming with us," Nika said, loading their supplies into David's truck. "It'll be good to have an extra set of eyes." Her daughter climbed into the back seat with Scout, chattering excitedly about their previous visits to the waterfall. The drive felt shorter this time, with David sharing stories about exploring these woods as a teenager, trying to piece together his uncle's last known movements. "I never found anything concrete back then," he admitted, steering carefully along the winding road. "But I always had this feeling that there was something more to discover, something we all missed." They parked at the now familiar trailhead, the sound of the distant waterfall already audible through the trees. The morning sun filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Scout led the way, nose to the ground, while Nika's daughter skipped along beside him. "The falls haven't changed much since I was a kid," David remarked as they hiked. Uncle Thomas used to bring me here sometimes. He'd tell me about the local wildlife, teach me to identify different birds by their calls. Nika watched her daughter run ahead with Scout, then lowered her voice. Did he ever mention anything about the mill? About what he might have discovered? David shook his head. Not to me directly. I was too young. But I remember overhearing arguments between him and my father. Dad kept telling him to leave it alone, that he was going to get himself into trouble. The roar of the waterfall grew louder as they approached the clearing. The white spray caught the sunlight, creating tiny rainbows in the mist. Nika pulled out the old Polaroid, comparing it once again to the scene before them. Let's split up. David suggested. Cover more ground. I'll check around the base of the falls while you two look near where Scout found the tin box. For hours, they searched methodically. Nika's daughter made a game of it, pretending to be a detective while she carefully looked under rocks and behind bushes. David waded through the shallow pools at the base of the falls, checking every crevice. Nika retraced their previous steps, wondering what else they might have missed. The sun had climbed high overhead when Scout's excited barking caught their attention. He was scratching frantically at something behind the waterfall, where a narrow ledge allowed access to a shallow cave-like hollow in the rock face. Scout found something. Nika's daughter called out excitedly. David carefully made his way across the slippery rocks to investigate. There's definitely something here, he called back. Wedged pretty deep in this crevice. Working together, they managed to extract a package wrapped in old oilcloth. The material still surprisingly intact despite the years of exposure to the waterfall's spray. Nika's hands trembled as she carefully unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound journal. They retreated to drier ground, sitting on sun-warmed rocks while Nika gently opened the journal. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting that she recognized from the signature on her mother's letters. Thomas's writing. It's dated 1995, she said softly, scanning the first page. David leaned in closer, his expression intense as they read through the entries. The full scope of what Thomas had uncovered began to emerge. The journal detailed systematic corruption at the mill, toxic waste dumping, falsified safety reports, bribes to local officials. With each page, Thomas's growing fear became more evident. They're watching me now, one entry read. I've gathered enough evidence to expose everything. But I know they won't let that happen. Yesterday, I found my office ransacked. Today, my brake lines were cut. They're sending a message, but I can't back down. Too many lives are at stake. Nika's daughter had wandered off to play with Scout near the water's edge, leaving the adults to read the increasingly disturbing accounts. Thomas wrote about threats against not just himself, but also against Caroline, Nika's mother. I have to protect her, he'd written. She wants to stand with me, but I can't let her take that risk. There's too much at stake. Too many powerful people involved. I've hidden copies of the evidence where they'll never find them, but I fear it may already be too late for me. The final entry was dated just 2 days before his disappearance. The handwriting was rushed, almost frantic. Meeting with Jay tonight. Says he has proof of the cover-up going back 20 years. If anything happens to me, the truth is hidden where it all began. Caroline will understand. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple, Nika held the journal tightly against her chest. The weight of Thomas's words, his fear, his determination to expose the truth despite the danger. It all felt overwhelmingly real. Scout came trotting back, shaking water from his fur, while Nika's daughter collected pretty rocks near the water's edge. David sat quietly beside Nika, his face troubled as he processed everything they'd read. The truth they'd been searching for was finally in their hands, but with it came the chilling realization that the same dangers Thomas had faced might still exist. The people responsible for his disappearance might still be out there, still protecting their secrets. The warm glow of the table lamp cast long shadows across Nika's living room. As she settled into her favorite armchair, Thomas's journal cradled in her lap, Scout lay alert by the front door, his golden fur catching the lamplight as he maintained his protective watch. The house was quiet except for the soft whir of the ceiling fan and her daughter's gentle breathing. From the bedroom down the hall, Nika's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the journal again, picking up where she'd left off at the waterfall. The pages felt delicate beneath her touch, and Thomas's handwriting seemed to leap off the yellowed paper, urgent and insistent even after all these years. June 15th, 1995. She read silently. Met with Richard Blackwood today. He tried to buy my silence. Offered me a promotion and a significant raise if I'd forget what I discovered about the chemical dumping. When I refused, his friendly demeanor changed. The threat wasn't spoken, but I saw it in his eyes. Scout's ears perked up at some distant sound. But he remained still, watchful. Nika continued reading, her heart racing as the names began appearing in Thomas's careful documentation. James Morrison, head of the Environmental Compliance Department, has been falsifying reports for years. William Peterson in accounting helps cover the tracks through creative bookkeeping. Mayor Kenneth Douglas turns a blind eye. His new vacation home wasn't paid for with his official salary. The list went on, each name accompanied by detailed notes about their involvement in the cover-up. Thomas had been thorough, methodically building his case against the corruption that ran through every level of the mills. Operation, July 3rd. Frank Wheeler approached me in the parking lot tonight, said he knew about my meetings with the EPA investigator, reminded me that accidents happen all the time in mills like ours. His words seemed casual, but the message was clear. They'll kill me if I don't back down. Nika's hand flew to her mouth as she read the next entry, July 10th. Someone broke into my house today. Nothing taken, but my files were clearly searched. Found a dead crow on my front porch. Message received. But I can't stop now. Too many workers are getting sick. The river's dying. They have to be stopped. Scout suddenly lifted his head, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Seconds later, a sharp knock at the front door made Nika jump. She glanced at the clock. 10:45 at night. Who would be visiting at this hour? Scout stood, hackles raised, as Nika approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, she recognized Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down, an elderly woman who lived in the neighborhood for decades. Mrs. Henderson. Nika opened the door partway, Scout pressing against her leg. Is everything okay? The older woman's usually friendly face was drawn with worry. I saw your lights on, dear. May I come in for a moment? Nika hesitated, then nodded, stepping back to allow her neighbor inside. Mrs. Henderson's eyes darted around the room, landing briefly on the journal still sitting in the armchair. I heard you've been asking questions around town, Mrs. Henderson said quietly, wringing her hands. About Thomas Hale and the old mill business. Nika's pulse quickened. Yes, I've been trying to understand what happened to him. Did you know Thomas? Everyone knew Thomas, Mrs. Henderson replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Such a good man. Too good, maybe. Too principled for his own safety. She paused, glancing nervously at the windows. Listen to me, dear. Some things are better left in the past. Some secrets, they have long memories in this town, and long arms. Scout moved closer to Nika, still watching Mrs. Henderson intently. The older woman reached out, patting Nika's arm with trembling fingers. I knew your mother. You know. Such a lovely girl. She was heartbroken after everything happened. She understood finally that sometimes silence is the safest choice. Mrs. Henderson, I need to know the truth. Nika insisted. Thomas left evidence. Don't. Mrs. Henderson's grip tightened on Nika's arm. Don't dig too deep into Old Town secrets, dear. Some of those men Thomas wrote about, their sons run things now. They protect their father's legacies. They protect their family names. She released Nika's arm, stepping back toward the door. Just be careful. For your daughter's sake. The warning hung heavy in the air as Mrs. Henderson hurried out into the night. Nika closed the door behind her, turning the deadbolt with shaking hands. She checked the windows, drawing all the curtains tightly closed as Scout followed her movements with worried eyes. A small sound from the hallway made her turn. Her daughter stood there in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mommy? I heard voices. Nika crossed the room in 3 quick steps, gathering her daughter into her arms and holding her close. The weight of Mrs. Henderson's warning pressed down on her like a physical thing. The past wasn't past at all. It was still very much alive, still dangerous, still capable of reaching into the present with threatening fingers. Her daughter hugged her back, not understanding the sudden fierce embrace, but responding to her mother's need for closeness. Scout came to press against their legs, offering his own form of protection and comfort. Standing there in her darkened living room, holding her daughter tight while her neighbor's warning echoed in her mind, Nika faced the chilling realization that she might have awakened something that should have stayed buried. The truth about Thomas had survived all these years, hidden in his journal, but so had the dangers he'd faced, passed down from fathers to sons like a dark inheritance. Sunlight streamed through the tall library windows, casting warm rectangles across the wooden table where Nika and David sat in a secluded corner. Scout lay quietly at their feet as Nika carefully placed Thomas's journal between them. I couldn't sleep after what happened last night, Nika whispered, glancing around to ensure they were alone. Mrs. Henderson's warning really shook me up. David nodded gravely, his fingers trailing over the journal's worn leather cover. The old families still have influence here, but we can't let fear stop us from learning the truth about Uncle Thomas. They bent their heads together over the journal, turning pages with careful fingers. Thomas's neat handwriting filled page after page with detailed accounts of the mill's wrongdoings. Look at this entry. David pointed to a passage dated August 15th, 1995. He was gathering testimonies from workers who'd gotten sick. Chemical dumping in the river, unsafe working conditions, bribes to keep inspectors quiet. Nika leaned closer, reading aloud in a hushed voice. Marcus Wheeler signed his statement today. That makes 12 witnesses willing to speak up. I'm keeping the documents separate. Too dangerous to have everything in one place. He was building a case, David said, his voice thick with emotion. All these years, we thought he'd just run away. But he was trying to protect people. They continued reading, piecing together Thomas's final weeks. He'd been methodically collecting evidence, sworn statements, photographs, medical records. The journal detailed meetings with workers late at night, secret exchanges of documents, plans to contact state authorities. The entries get more urgent toward the end, Nick observed, pointing to increasingly rushed handwriting. He knew they were watching him. The final entry was dated September 23rd, 1995. The words were hurried, almost frantic. They're closer than I thought. Wheeler disappeared yesterday. Can't risk keeping everything together anymore. M knows where to find. The sentence cut off mid-word, the rest of the page blank. David's hand trembled as he touched the unfinished line. He must have hidden the evidence somewhere before they got to him, David said quietly. All those witness statements, the proof he collected, it has to be out there somewhere. Nika sat back, her mind racing. The M he mentioned. Could that be my mother? They were planning to meet at the waterfall. The waterfall, David repeated thoughtfully. We found the journal there. Maybe, he straightened suddenly, his expression determined. We need to do something first, though. Something that's long overdue. What do you mean? A memorial, David said firmly. For Uncle Thomas. No one ever. There was never a funeral, never any closure. Just whispers and rumors. He deserves to be remembered properly, for the good man he was. Nika reached across the table, squeezing David's hand. Of course, we could do it at the waterfall where we found his journal. It feels right, somehow. Tomorrow, David suggested. We could meet there in the morning. Bring flowers, maybe say a few words. Nothing fancy, just something to acknowledge him. To let him know we understand now what he was trying to do. Nika nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and hope flutter in her chest. Tomorrow morning, then. And afterward, we can look more carefully around the falls. If he hid other evidence there, we'll find it, David said with quiet conviction. Whatever happens, Uncle Thomas's truth deserves to be told. They carefully wrapped the journal back in its protective cloth. Scout stood as they gathered their things, sensing their preparation to leave. Through the library windows, clouds drifted across the sun, casting shifting shadows across their faces. Be careful getting home, David whispered as they parted ways near the library steps. After your neighbor's warning, you too, Nika replied softly. See you tomorrow at the falls. They shared one last look, both nervous about what lay ahead, yet hopeful that tomorrow might bring answers they'd both sought for so long. Scout pressed against Nika's leg as she watched David walk away, his shoulders straight and determined despite the weight of his uncle's unfinished story. The memorial would be their way of acknowledging the past, while moving forward with their search for truth. As Nika drove home, Scout watching alertly from the backseat, she felt that familiar mixture of anticipation and fear. Tomorrow would bring them one step closer to understanding what happened to Thomas Hale, and why some people still wanted that truth to stay buried. Morning mist clung to the trail as Nika, her daughter, David, and Scout made their way toward the waterfall. The sound of rushing water grew louder with each step, a constant rhythm that seemed to match their heartbeats. In their arms, they carried wildflowers gathered from meadows along the way, purple lupines, white daisies, and golden black-eyed Susans that reminded Nika of her mother's garden. Scout trotted ahead, his tail wagging as he led the way along the familiar path. Nika's daughter skipped beside him, carefully protecting her small bouquet of flowers. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. It's peaceful here, David said softly, adjusting his own armful of flowers. Uncle Thomas would have liked that. Nika nodded, thinking of the man she'd come to know through his journal pages and her mother's letters. The trail curved ahead, and suddenly the waterfall came into view, its white spray catching the morning sunlight in a rainbow of colors. They gathered at the base of the falls, where the mist created a gentle curtain around them. David helped Nika's daughter arrange her flowers on a flat rock, creating a natural altar of sorts. One by one, they added their bouquets until a carpet of colors spread before them. Should we say something? Nika's daughter asked, her voice barely audible above the roar of the falls. Nika reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out one of her mother's letters, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. I'd like to read this, she said, looking at David for approval. When he nodded, she unfolded the delicate paper. My dearest Thomas, she began, her voice growing stronger as she read. When I'm with you, I feel like I can finally be myself. You see the world the way it should be, fair and just. Your courage in standing up for what's right makes me love you even more. Whatever happens, know that my heart is yours, always. David wiped his eyes, then reached for the journal they'd found. I have something to, he said, opening to a marked page. September 20th, 1995. The evidence is overwhelming now. Wheeler gave me the final proof today. Documents showing how deep the corruption goes. I can't back down, not when so many lives are at stake. But I'm afraid, not for myself, but for Em if anything happens to me. I pray she'll understand why I had to do this. The words hung in the air, mixing with the mist. Nika's daughter pressed closer to her mother's side as David continued reading from another entry. They're watching the house now. Wheeler's disappearance wasn't an accident. I know too much, and they know I know. The mill owners, the town officials who took bribes, they'll do anything to keep this quiet. I have to hide the evidence somewhere safe. The Waterfall, Em will understand. Nika's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't running away, she whispered. They killed him to keep him quiet. David nodded grimly, and hid his body where no one would find it. But his journal, these letters, they prove he was a good man. A brave man, Scout whined softly, pressing against Nika's legs. The Waterfall's roar seemed to grow louder, its spray creating a curtain of tears around them. He loved your mother so much, David said, touching the flowers gently. And she loved him. They weren't just having some secret affair. They were trying to make things right. Mom never told me, Nika's daughter said quietly. But she used to come here sometimes, didn't she? Yes, sweetheart. Nika wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. I think she came to feel close to him, to remember. The morning sun broke through the trees, catching the water spray in brilliant sparkles. A warm breeze stirred the flowers, carrying their sweet scent upward. Nika closed her eyes, and in that moment, she felt it, a presence, familiar and loving, wrapping around her like an embrace. Her mother had carried the secret for so long, protecting Thomas's memory while living with the pain of losing him. Now, finally, the truth was known. Thomas hadn't abandoned anyone. He died trying to protect others, trying to expose corruption that had poisoned their town. You're free now, Nika whispered, her words carried away by the rushing water. The presence seemed to linger for a moment longer, then gently fade like morning mist in sunshine. Scout barked once, softly, his tail wagging as he looked up at the falls. Nika's daughter smiled through her tears, arranging one last daisy among the flowers. David stood straight and tall, his shoulders finally free of the weight of uncertainty about his uncle's fate. The Waterfall continued its eternal song, but now it seemed less lonely, less mournful. It had been guardian of this truth for so long, and now that truth was finally in the light. Thomas Hale's story was known at last, not as someone who ran away, but as a man who gave his life trying to make things right. The flames danced in the fireplace, casting warm shadows across Nika's living room. She sat curled up on the couch, her daughter snuggled close beside her while Scout dozed at their feet. On the mantel above them, the framed Polaroid held a place of honor next to a leather-bound journal. Thomas's last testament, carefully preserved in a protective sleeve. Mom? Her daughter asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Do you think Grandma would be happy we found out the truth? Nika smiled softly, running her fingers through her daughter's hair. I think she would. She carried that secret for so long, trying to protect everyone. Scout's ears perked up suddenly, and his tail began to wag. Moments later, a knock sounded at the door. David Hale stood on the porch, his face flushed with excitement despite the evening chill. You need to see this, he said, holding up several newspapers as he stepped inside. Scout greeted him with an enthusiastic bark while Nika's daughter made room for him on the couch. The story broke this morning, David explained, spreading the papers across the coffee table. Front page in 3 local papers, long-buried truth comes to light, Thomas Hale vindicated. Nika leaned forward, scanning the headlines. The articles detailed everything. The mill's corruption, the bribes, the cover-up of Thomas's murder. His name was finally cleared, his reputation restored, the reopening the investigation. David continued, his voice thick with emotion. Some of the men involved are still alive. They'll have to answer for what they did. Nika's daughter pointed to a photograph in one of the articles. Look, Mom, they used the picture of the waterfall. Indeed, there was the familiar cascade, though the newspaper photo was recent, taken just days ago during their memorial. The flowers they'd laid were visible at the base of the falls. Your mother was incredibly brave, David said softly to Nika. She knew the truth all along but stayed quiet to protect you. Those men, they would have hurt anyone who spoke up. Nika nodded, feeling tears well up in her eyes. She raised me alone, never complained, never let on how much pain she was in. She looked at her own daughter, understanding now more than ever the depth of a mother's love and sacrifice. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep going, day after day, protecting the ones you love, like you do. Mom, her daughter said, hugging her tight. The truth of those words touched something deep in Nika's heart. She'd been a single mother too, facing her own struggles and doubts. But like her mother before her, she'd found the strength to carry on, to build a life filled with love and hope. What happens now? Her daughter asked, looking between Nika and David. Now, Nika said, standing up, I think we could use some fresh air. Want to take a walk? Her daughter's face lit up. Scout was already at the door, tail wagging as Nika grabbed their jackets. David gathered up the newspapers, promising to bring more news as the story developed. After he left, Nika and her daughter stepped out into the crisp evening air, hand in hand. Scout trotted beside them, his golden coat catching the last rays of sunset. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance, Nika could hear the faint sound of rushing water. The waterfall still called to her heart, but differently now. It was no longer a place of mystery and unspoken grief. Instead, it had become something else, a symbol of truth revealed, of justice long delayed but finally served. Most of all, it was a place of peace where love had proved stronger than secrets, and where healing had finally begun. Scout led the way down the familiar path, his paws crunching on fallen leaves. Nika squeezed her daughter's hand, grateful for the simple joy of this moment. The truth about Thomas was out at last, her mother's sacrifice honored, and their family's story could now be told in full. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story written gently for the heart.